what we know about worry and how you can help yourself deal with your worries. So we're talking about 7 steps to overcoming your worry. And if you think about the things that you're worried about, you're like a lot of worriers. You kind of go from one worry to another worry. What are people going to think of me? Will I make a good impression? Will I make a fool of myself? Will I say something stupid? And if I say something stupid, will they get the punchline? Did I make a mistake? Do I have a dreaded disease? A lot of my patients who are chronic worriers will, search on Google for, cancer and brain tumor and that sort of thing. Will I lose all my money? Which, of course, is probably true. What if something happens to my kids or a loved one? What if my partner leaves me? What we know about people who are chronic worriers is that they go from one worry to another worry over and over and over again. And they've been worriers for years. People who are chronic worriers will often say, I've been a worrier all my life. So, just imagine if we were trying to make sense of why you worry. You think about the nature of your own worry. And, just imagine if we had somebody who came down from Mars and they never knew how to worry, and you were going to teach them how to worry. You're going to write a rule book on how to be a good neurotic worrier. You probably are familiar with some of these rules. Okay? Think about your own worries. If something bad could happen, if you can simply imagine it happening, then it's your responsibility to worry about it. So the minute a thought comes into your head about some terrible thing that could happen, you've got to really pay attention to that thought and focus on it. The second rule, and you may want to write these down just in case you think you're not doing a good enough job of worrying. The second rule is don't accept any uncertainty. You need to know for sure. So if you go to see a doctor and the doctor says, no, actually, it doesn't look like you have cancer, why should you believe that doctor? After all, what do doctors really know? And where did she get her medical degree anyway? So you have to get certainty. Treat all of your negative thoughts as if they're really true. So if you think you have a dreaded disease, then treat that as if it's an actual fact. Fourth, anything bad that could happen is a reflection of who you are as a person. So if you give a party and there's somebody sitting in the corner moping and feeling bad, it's probably because you're not a good host or hostess. It's all up to you. Every problem in the world is up to you. Fifth, failure is unacceptable. So if you're a good worrier, you'll accept absolutely no failure, which means that you will absolutely insist on perfection and 100% success. Sixth, get rid of any negative feeling immediately. So if you have any negative feelings at all, you feel sad or anxious or confused or ambivalent, you've got to get rid of that feeling immediately. And if you don't, you should probably worry about it. And seventh, treat everything like an emergency. So if you don't have the answer right now, that's an emergency. You actually need the answer right now. So you could also Google, you could seek out reassurance, you could call your doctors, you could try to figure out what the answer is right now. And if you don't, then you should panic. Now you probably think, here I've done this extensive research on worry, and we have all the rules, and if you follow these rules, you'll probably be a first-class worrier. But did I leave something out? Maybe I was just trying to be facile and funny and witty, and maybe I left something out. You really can't trust your memory, can you, if you're a worrier, which is one of the reasons you worry. You keep looking at your memory and say, did I forget something? You wake up in the middle of the night and you have a brilliant thought, and then you worry about you'll forget it if you go to sleep. Well, I actually forgot to mention there's an 8th rule. I forgot to mention you should worry about worrying. Because once you start worrying, in order to prevent bad things from happening, or to be prepared, or that you won't be surprised, or so that you'll be responsible, once you start worrying, then you realize you're going crazy. And you begin thinking, my worry is out of control, I've got to stop worrying. So you're in a catch-22, spinning around in your chair at a land speed record, worrying because you need to worry to be prepared, and having to stop worrying because you think the worry is going to drive you crazy. If any of this is familiar, you can please stand up and leave now. Anyway, you forgot to say to yourself, all of this worrying is going to drive me crazy, give me a heart attack, ruin my life completely. The 8th rule, now that you've worried, you've got to stop worrying completely or you'll go crazy and die. So your worry, you feel your worry is uncontrollable and dangerous. How many of you recognize some of your own patterns here? You raise your hand. What's interesting is that the research in cognitive therapy on the nature of worry actually has illustrated that these are the processes that underlie chronic worry. You might wonder, why am I talking about worry if we're talking about depression? 93% of people who are chronic worriers also have another psychiatric diagnosis. And the most common psychiatric diagnosis that they have is depression. Either they have what we call major depression, which is that they're really, really depressed, or they have dysthymia, which is a low-level depression that goes on for years. And in fact, what we know is that for about 80% of chronic worriers, over a period of years, they eventually worry themselves into depression. So some diagnosticians actually think about chronic worry as sort of another form of depression. I'm going to outline 7 steps that I think you can take. You can actually begin doing these things today. If you think about what you're worried about, if you think about, you're worried about your your 401k, your stock portfolio, your kids' illness, your job, how you come across, whatever. I'm going to go through each one of these steps to think about what you can actually do to reverse your pattern of worry. I'm going to talk about worry. When I talk about worry, what I mean by worry is that you have these recurrent negative predictions about the future. So, somebody said, people are worried about the environment. I've never had a patient in my life who came in and said, oh, God, I can't sleep because of the environment. Now, all of us want to say we're worried about the environment, but we're probably not lying in bed thinking about it all the time. The most common worries that people have, in fact, are about relationships, about their family or about their personal relationships. Right. I'm going to go through each one of these steps in terms of how you can reverse your worry. Now, let's take the first step. Let's say, for example, you're worried about your stock portfolio. Anybody here worried about that? Now, one thing to ask yourself about your worry, whatever it might be, you worry about your stock portfolio or what people think or whatever it might be. First thing to ask yourself is this worry going to be productive? Is it going to be useful? So I actually think that there's some worries that are actually very useful. So a worry that I had was, how am I going to get from New York City to Louisville? The worry was, do I have a plane reservation? Do I have a hotel reservation? Do I have a car service or a taxi that can pick me up and take me to the airport? Am I giving myself enough time? I call that productive worry because it leads to a to-do list. There's something that I actually can do. I can call the car service. I can call the airlines. I can do something today. Productive worry is, what is my to-do list today? The unproductive worry would be, what if people don't like me? What if my PowerPoint presentation fails? What if my mind goes blank? What if I get sick and collapse on the stage? These are not things that I can do anything about 2 days ago, when I began thinking about the plan to come here. So the first thing to ask yourself, is this worry going to be productive? Is it going to lead to a to-do list? The productive worry, you're worried about your 401k, whatever. The productive worry might be, do I have my investments diversified? Do I have a budget? Can I reduce some expenses? Those are things that you can begin doing and planning today. The unproductive worry is, what if the country goes into a Great Depression and, we have unemployment of 25%, which I actually doubt will happen. But there's nothing that you can do about it. So there's productive worry and unproductive worry. The first question to ask is there any to-do list for me today? The second step would really be accepting reality the way it is. So, for example, what we know about worriers is worriers equate uncertainty with a bad outcome. They actually think if I don't know something for sure, it's likely to be bad. The outcome is likely to be bad. What the research shows, though, is that for worriers, when they have people make a prediction and then follow up and collect the data about what actually happened, 85% of the things that people worry about have a positive or neutral outcome, which is an important observation that many of the things that you worried about in the past actually probably had a positive or neutral outcome. When bad outcomes occur, the research shows 79% of the time, worriers say, I actually handled it better than I thought I would. So worriers are actually good at handling real problems that really exist when they really happen, but they generate 85 problems that don't happen. But if you equate uncertainty with a bad outcome, then you are going to worry as a way of getting certainty. What if this? Let me get more and more information. So you have to think about, is there an advantage for me of accepting some uncertainty? And there probably is. And we accept uncertainty every day when we meet people, we talk to people, we eat food in restaurants, we drive down the road. We don't know what's going to happen next. We accept a lot of uncertainty. Along with accepting uncertainty is accepting some limitation. The old adage that it's important to know what you can control and what you cannot control and to know the difference between the two. But accepting limitation about what I can do, like I cannot get back the money that was lost in my 401k. I like to think of that money, it's died and gone to heaven. And I say prayers every night to the money, hoping for its blessed soul. But the money is gone. Accepting limitation, I can't do anything about it. What can I do? What things can I control in my life today? One thing we know about people who are depressed or people who worry is that they avoid unpleasant activities. They avoid discomfort. So, for example, let's say that somebody is worried about, making a fool of themselves if they go to a party or if they meet people. They think they won't be interesting, they'll be boring, whatever. And so they think, maybe I just won't go. I'll make believe I'm not feeling well, or I have another appointment, or too much work, or whatever it might be. People who worry often avoid doing things that are uncomfortable. Now, if you think about your own life and you think about the things that you've done in your life that are meaningful, things that you feel proud about, they're probably things that were uncomfortable to do, whether it's to get training or to have a relationship or to raise kids or the work that you've done or any way in which you've advanced yourself or made your life meaningful. And I say to my patients that the goal of therapy initially is actually to learn how to tolerate discomfort. I call it constructive discomfort. To learn how to do something every day that you actually don't want to do. So if you want to get into shape physically, somebody says, do you want to get into shape physically? Yes, I do. Do you want to diet, reduce your calorie intake? No, I don't. Do you want to exercise? No, I don't. Right. So the goal here, in my view, is to recognize that progress is based on doing what you don't want to do. It's doing what you're willing to do. Are you willing to reduce your calorie intake? Are you willing to exercise? Constructive discomfort, you're going to be uncomfortable anyway if you're depressed or anxious, but you may as well use your discomfort as something that makes your life better. For example, people who study ballet or classical dance, when you ask them, was it a good workout? They'll say, yes, it was. How do you know it was? Because it hurt good. It hurt good. And that's a great phrase that captures the idea that you're actually doing something, you're pushing yourself, and you're collecting discomfort as a way of making progress. So we ask people who are worriers or people who are depressed and who are kind of withdrawn and isolated, whatever, to avoid avoiding. That the goal every day is to do things that are uncomfortable. And if you're doing things that are uncomfortable every day, you should count that as progress. The third thing that we know about worriers is that they have a whole range of distorted thoughts or biases in their thinking. So, for example, they think, well, if I go to this party and I go up to people and I start talking, I'll make a fool of myself. That's what we call fortune telling. Or they think, or they're talking to somebody and they begin thinking, oh, you know, he or she thinks I'm an idiot. That's mind reading. Of course, it could be true that they think you're an idiot, but you may not know for a fact. Or they take things personally. People who worry or people who are depressed will take things personally. They'll think that if something bad happens, it's always their fault. Or they think that it's catastrophic. For example, you think about the current financial crisis. Some of the magazines and radio shows and stuff have interviewed me about the financial crisis. And certainly there's a real problem out there in terms of the financial markets and the banks and lending and all that. But if you think about it today, we have an unemployment rate of about 6.1%. In the Depression in the 1930s, the unemployment rate was 25%. And the Depression went on for years and years and years and years. The stock market dropped 89% from its high. Now, certainly, the market has dropped quite a bit from its high in the past year. There's no question about that. But you know, thinking about losing money in your portfolio is certainly a bad outcome, and it's something that you have reason to be concerned about. But the problem with thinking about it as a catastrophe and the end of the world as we know it may not be as realistic. You know, people who are worriers will look at, if they talk to somebody and the other person doesn't like them, then it's a catastrophe. They view, if they don't do well on an exam, it's a catastrophe. If they make a mistake, it's a catastrophe. There are very few things in our lives on a daily basis that are real catastrophes. I mean, certainly the death of people that we love is a real catastrophe, really awful. But people who are worriers or people who are depressed will often view things as a total catastrophe. So let's go back to the financial worries that people have. And let's imagine you've had money in your 401k and you've lost 30 or 40%. One way of looking at it would be to recognize that maybe it's not a total catastrophe. Is what are you going to do differently today or tomorrow as a result of that? I mean, you're really going to do anything different today or tomorrow? People who, or let's say you go to a party and you talk to somebody and they don't like you. If I asked you to make a list of all the things that you can still do, even though that person doesn't like you, it would be a list of all the things that you could do before you even met that person. In other words, it may be inconvenient, it may be unpleasant, it may be a loss in terms of money, it may have implications for when you could retire or how much you're going to have, and maybe big items that you would buy, but there's still a lot of things that you can still do every single day that are important. One of the things that we ask people to do in cognitive therapy is to look at the evidence for and against your prediction. So, you know, people who think that I'm going to make a complete fool of myself I often talk to my colleagues and students who are concerned that if they go to give a talk that they're going to make a complete idiot of themselves. One thing I've actually asked people to do when they think this at a convention, I said, you've already heard 12 people talk in the last couple of days. Can you even remember who they are? I mean, one of the things about giving a presentation is that you'll probably forget who I am 48 hours from now. But people often make predictions, and they think that people are just thinking about them, and all they're doing is talking about them if they don't do something that's absolutely perfect. So you need to look at the evidence in favor of your negative view and against your negative view. I think one question to ask is, what advice would you give a friend? So, somebody who's worried about something happening, you might be very good at giving good advice to a friend, but you're not that good at giving good advice to yourself. So it's almost like turning yourself into your best friend to give yourself good advice. One other thing to think about is how often have you been wrong in the past? As I said before, 85% of the things that people worry about have a positive or neutral outcome. So this may be one more thing that you're worried about, which might very likely have a positive or neutral outcome. Or if you look back at the things that you worried about in the past, and they did come true, a negative event did come true, you're still here. You're still here to worry one more day, but you're still here, and you've learned how to cope with that to some extent. I was talking with somebody about this about 2 years ago, and I said, can you tell me what you worried about in the past? And she said, I used to worry about whether or not I would get divorced. And I said, well, what happened? She said, I got divorced. And I said, well, then how did that turn out? And she said it was difficult at first, but it turned out to be for the better. It turned out to be for the better for her. So thinking about your past worries and how you've coped, or have you been worried about the same thing over and over and over and over and over again? You have to think about, now why would worriers make the same negative predictions over and over and over and over again? In some ways, it's kind of like magical thinking. And here's an example. The rooster gets up in the morning before the sun rises. And the rooster, looks up, he has his multicolored feathered coat on, and he's very proud of himself, as all roosters are. I think actually roosters are now the new male role model, because we're lacking those. So the rooster gets up in the morning, and he crows, and I would do it for you, but I have a little bit of a cold, and you'd find it offensive. And so the rooster crows, and the sun rises. And the rooster says, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The rooster thinks he made the sun rise. Worriers are kind of like that. Worriers, worry, and things turn out to be okay. And so in a magical thinking, it's the illusion that maybe my worry protected me. I've had some examples of patients who I said, why don't you just say 10 times, things will turn out okay. I just want to see what that feels like to you. And some worriers will say, no, I don't want to do that because that'll jinx things. You ever hear that? It's like the evil eye, And then you have all these different countries and cultures battling who discovered the evil eye first. You really do. It's really fascinating. Cross-cultural psychology about paranoia. The other thing about worry is that worriers have tremendous fear of failure. And that they think that failure is completely unacceptable, that you can never fail, you should never fail. Failure is fatal, that if you fail, it means that you're a total loser as a human being. It's interesting, in high school or college, we never take a course called Failure 101, which is how to fail gracefully and how to turn failure into opportunity. But if you really think about it, failure is inevitable in a lot of areas of your life. You'll have a lot of failures in life. In fact, a famous Russian poet, Joseph Brodsky, gave a commencement address at Dartmouth College years ago, and he said, it's unfortunate that your great Ivy League education does not prepare you for boredom. And think about boredom as one of the things you have to cope with. But anyway, failure is an inevitable part of life, but worriers worry that they will fail. And they think that failure is horrible. They would label themselves as a failure or whatever. And what we know from the research on kids is that kids can divide up on two extremes. When they confront failure, one group of kids, when they confront failure, become helpless. They give up. They think, I'm stupid, I'm not good at this, I can't do anything at all. In other words, they label themselves as failures. Other kids, when they confront failure, they say, oh, now that's interesting. I didn't look at it that way. I really have to try harder. I have to think about a different way of solving the problem. Those kids become persistent in the face of failure. So you have kids who become helpless in the face of failure and kids who become persistent. if you think about, if you're a worrier and you think that if I fail, then I have to give up because I'm a loser and I'm stupid and nothing's going to work out, then you're going to worry about failing in the future. On the other hand, if you have this adaptive, persistent view of being empowered, I'm going to have a challenge, and if I don't succeed, I'll try to figure out another way of looking at it, I'll put my effort into it, or maybe I'll change my goals, or maybe I'll learn from the experience, or maybe I'm not that good at that, but I'm good at something else. That's a very, very different way of looking at failure. In fact, one way of looking at failure is thinking about failure as information. You know, I remember when I was first learning cognitive therapy, and I had David Burns as a supervisor. David Burns wrote the book Feeling Good years ago. And I would come in with my narcissism, and I would present to David Burns the superb case conceptualization that I worked on. And I did this a couple of times, and then David said, "Why are you wasting my time with supervision? Tell me about your failures, your frustrations, the things that are not working." And that's when I began learning. In other words, I began learning by sharing the vulnerability, the mistakes, the roadblocks, the resistance, my own resistance, all of that. Failure is information, it's an opportunity to learn, it's an opportunity to grow. In fact, there's a book by a historian of engineering and design called Success Through Failure. So you need to think about what your attitudes are and your theories are about failure. If you think that if you fail, you're a failure, then you're going to be very, very afraid of trying new things, and you'll worry in order to make sure you succeed, which of course will make it almost impossible for you to do things. You'll end up procrastinating, you'll end up avoiding. On the other hand, if you normalize failure and you look at it as a learning experience and as a challenge, you won't need to worry as much because you'll think, well, if it doesn't work out, I'll handle it. One thing we know about worriers, now this is, to me, a fascinating area of research. When you worry, the part of the brain that is activated is the cortical parts of the brain, which are your thinking parts of the brain. Because when we worry, we're thinking. We're thinking, you know, what if this, what if that? Let me see if I can do this, I can do that. It's all about thinking when you're worried. And in fact, the research actually shows that when you're worried, you're temporarily suppressing the physiological anxious arousal. Now think about it. When you're actively worried, what if this, what if that, what can I do, what can I do, what's the information, what's the way of solving the problem? When you're worried, you're actually temporarily less anxious. Worry temporarily blocks anxious arousal. So it's actually reinforced by blocking anxious arousal. And this theory of worry is the emotional avoidance theory of worry, that people worry in order to temporarily suppress anxious arousal. However, after they go through their what if, and they stop that kind of thinking it through, later the anxious arousal comes out as free-floating anxiety, muscle tension, gastroenterological, disturbances, irritable bowel syndrome, sweating, all that kind of physiological arousal. It's almost as if the arousal incubates or kind of goes underground temporarily. It's like worry is like a drink. You worry in order to suppress the arousal, and then the arousal comes back later. What we know about, from our research on worry and the research of other colleagues, is that people who worry have very negative views of emotion. They think that if they feel anxious, their anxiety does not make sense. They think that if they feel anxious, their anxiety is going to go on forever. They think that their anxiety is dangerous. They focus on their anxiety. They focus on their sensations when they feel anxious. They think that other people don't have the same kind of anxiety that they do. They feel ashamed or guilty about their emotions. They think, I should only feel one way. So one of the things that I find interesting is that, that we found that people who worry or people who ruminate, who keep going over and over and over and over trying to figure what's the answer, have a very difficult time handling mixed feelings. They have a hard time handling ambivalence. So somebody will say, well, I met this person, I've been going out now for a couple of years, and I'm thinking about getting married, but I'm not so sure because I have mixed feelings. I have mixed feelings. In other words, they think they shouldn't have mixed feelings. They should only feel one way. And I say, maybe the reason that you have mixed feelings is that now you know the person. So you probably have mixed feelings about yourself. You have mixed feelings about your friends, your parents, even your kids or whatever it might be. In other words, mixed feelings, having ambivalent feelings may just simply be that you have more information and you know the pros and cons. But worriers or people who ruminate, they want certainty and they want the answer, as opposed to saying, yeah, there are a lot of things that are good, some things negative, some things neutral, being able to tolerate mixed feelings. In fact, we actually found that in looking at what predicts whether people are relatively happily married, one is, do you feel that your partner validates your emotion? I can understand how you feel, that must be hard for you. Do you feel like you can express your emotions with your partner? Do you blame your partner? Not surprisingly, if you blame your partner, you're not happy. But we also found that a good predictor of feeling relatively happy in your marriage is the ability to tolerate mixed feelings. It's not that your partner now is making you happy all the time. It's now that you've accepted things about your partner and he or she has accepted things about you. But anyway, what we find with worriers is that they have these very negative views about their emotions. And so one of the things that we try to do with our chronic worriers or people who are depressed or ruminate is to validate the way you feel. For example, let's take jealousy. Jealousy is something that is a very common problem for people who are anxious or depressed, whatever. And my colleague, Dennis Church, and I were thinking, who's actually written about jealousy in any intelligent way? and we really couldn't find anything that was that useful in terms of understanding jealousy. I mean, some people will say, oh, you're jealous because you have low self-esteem. That may not be true. You may be jealous because you have high self-esteem, because you say, I'm not going to allow that to happen. So what we thought about is that jealousy is actually a form of worry. I describe it as angry, agitated worry. And one of the things that we think about with our patients or friends or colleagues, whatever, who have problems with jealousy is the first thing to do is to validate that emotion is an important emotion. And in fact, that emotion may actually point to your higher values, that you value monogamy and honesty and commitment. So looking at sometimes our painful emotions reflect things that are important about our values that you want to hold on to. When we think about, though, with jealousy is that some people who are jealous will think, I want to, be prepared, I don't want to be surprised, and so they begin interrogating and cross-examining their partner, or they begin spying on their partner, or provoking their partner, or they derogate the opposition. They put down other men or women who are the competition. So we try to look at how you can look at your jealousy as a normal human emotion that's part of all human cultures. In fact, a lot of animals have jealousy. And that you, even if you feel jealous, you don't have to act on it. You don't have to go through the interrogation of your partner or try to provoke your partner. So, but the other thing is to think about your emotions as temporary. What we think about is that when we have an emotion, if we're anxious or depressed, we think that emotion is just going to last forever. As opposed to whatever emotion you may have, it probably will only last a short period of time. So even if, whether it's jealousy or anxiety or anxious arousal or whatever. One thing we say to patients who are worriers is you feel that the worry is constantly going through your head all day long. What if you did this? when you had a worry, you wrote it out on a piece of paper and you set it aside, and you set it aside for worry time. Let's say worry time is 4:30 to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So if you have a worry at 10 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock at night, you write it down, you set it aside. Now people will say, how can you do that? When I have a worry, I can't get it out of my mind. We just put it on a piece of paper. And you can also imagine that your worry is in your mind, but you're not obeying it. You don't have to answer it right now. You set it aside for a later time, worry time. And what we find is that worriers are able to set it aside, and when they get to 4:30 in the afternoon, they think, it's really not that bad a thing. It's not something I'm really that concerned about. So you begin finding that you can put the worries off. Eventually, when you get to 4:30, it's hard to keep your mind on worry. Here's another example of what you can do with the worry. How many of you have had problems falling asleep or staying asleep? A lot of us have had that problem, right? I want you to close your eyes right now. And don't worry, I won't touch you. I won't sit on your lap, although I want to. But Dr. Wright says it's not appropriate and that I might get sued. So I won't do it. But just close your eyes and just silently repeat in your mind, I will never fall asleep. I'll say it for you. And just sort of notice how you begin feeling. I will never fall asleep. 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 How many of you are beginning to feel a little bit drowsy? Right? It's an interesting exercise in a way, because what happens when you worry, the thought comes in your head, oh my God, I went to bed at 11 o'clock, it's now 11:15, I'll never fall asleep. And that thought appears. It's like a character comes into your bedroom and is standing over you. You're never going to fall asleep. And now you're in this dialogue with the character. Oh, God, I got to get to sleep right now. Let me go to sleep. And you begin tensing your muscles to the point where you have muscle ache from your tensing exercise. And you say, another 5 minutes has gone by. You're watching the clock. Oh, I'll never fall asleep. Oh, I got to get to sleep now that I thought I'll never fall asleep. I've got to do something. I've got to fall asleep now. It's like somebody standing over you. Fall asleep, fall asleep. And you wonder why you don't fall asleep. So what you do is the thought comes in your head, I'll never fall asleep. And then you get your strategy out, checking the clock, tensing yourself, checking to see if you've fallen asleep, counting backward by 3.5 until you have a panic attack. Count backwards by 3.46. But this exercise, I'll never fall asleep, is you take the feared thought, I'll never fall asleep, and you flood yourself with the thought over and over and over. If you had a fear of the elevator, I would ask you to get on the elevator 100 times, go up and down, up and down, up and down. And what you would find is that the elevator would become boring. The same thing with the feared thought, I'll never fall asleep. Now, I had a patient who had a fear, maybe I have cancer. This is a guy who was 70 years old, who had these health anxiety fears for decades, for about 45 years. And so what I had him do as an exercise is spend 30 minutes a day repeating like a zombie, like in a very slow, methodical voice, it's always possible I could have cancer. And he died of cancer in 6 months. No, I'm only kidding. He surprisingly became a lot less anxious. The seventh step is taking control of time. So, for example, let's say you have fears about the financial markets. How many of you have fears about the financial and the economics and all that, right? We all do. All right, so let's set that aside, put that up on a shelf for right now, and think about the present moment. Think about think about where you are in the present moment. And there are exercises in mindfulness that I think one of Dr. Wright's colleagues is an expert in, where you basically focus on your breathing, you focus on the present moment. When I was writing about this, and we have a house up in Connecticut in a very rural area, and I was looking outside, and I was thinking about, being in the present moment. I was looking at the clouds, and I watched the clouds go by, and I was thinking about being one with the clouds, and then I realized I felt like I was stoned. So what the hell was I writing about? Oh, staying in the present moment, right. But staying in the present moment, if you're worried, it's always about the future. What's going to happen with my 401k in 20 years? Stay in the present moment. Stay in the present moment with loved ones or, whatever it might be. Here's an exercise to put things in perspective. And you're worried about money. Let's imagine everything has been taken away. Your eyesight, your ability to have any sensation, your family, your body, your money, your job, everything has been taken away, all right? Now you have to ask for one thing back at a time, but you don't know how many of these things you're going to get back. You get one thing back at a time, but here's the trick. You only get it back if you can make a case that you really appreciate it. I did this with a patient of mine who had lost a lot of money, not in the stock market, but from a business deal. And he was ruminating about it and depressed about it and criticizing himself about it. And I asked him to put that up on the shelf for right now and think about what you would ask back, one thing at a time. And the first thing he had to ask back was he wanted his daughters back. He had 3 daughters. I said, which one do you want back first? He said, do I have to choose? I said, that's a good answer. You can have them all back if you can make a good case. And he went through each daughter and what he appreciated about them, which included the difficulties that they had, how they had grown together, how they had made him a better person because he had to learn how to love them. And that he went through each thing, went through his wife and how he appreciated her. And I said, close your eyes and let's imagine that you can never see again. If you could see again, what is the first thing you want to see? And he said, his family. And I said, you've noticed for the last 15 minutes as we've gone through this exercise, you haven't thought about money and you haven't mentioned money. You haven't worried about money. But all the things that were the most important to you were right here in front of you, but you never really looked at them because you were worried about the money and ruminating about the money. So a lot of things that, the old saying that the best things in life are free, although I've noticed they're getting very expensive nowadays. But a lot of the things that, if you think about the best memories that you've ever had in your life, the most wonderful times that you ever had, the experience that made you feel really at peace, they probably had something to do with, the birth of your children, or being close to a loved one, or nature, or music, or spirituality, or whatever it might be. And those are things that you can experience in the present moment. For example, one exercise that I find useful is to think about who has been kind to you in your life, and to which people or animals or to nature that you've expressed kindness and compassion. There's a lot of interest in what we call positive psychology, which is taking these positive aspects of human nature and values and virtue and using them as kind of antidepressant, cognitive therapy. So if you think about kindness and appreciation and compassion that you've received or that you've shown toward other people. I had a patient who was worried about money, and he tried some of these exercises, and he said, what I realize is that if I have gratitude, I don't worry. So one of my patients who is a Jewish guy who was at a retreat, and he was worried about a lot of things, and he saw a rabbi, and the rabbi was in a wheelchair. And he said to the rabbi, you know, I'm really worried about a lot of things and depressed about a lot of things. And the rabbi said, look at me, I'm in a wheelchair and I'm not depressed and I'm not worried. And the patient said, you know, Rabbi, I respect you greatly, but I don't know if I'd be able to handle that. I don't know if I'd be able to handle a disability like that. And the rabbi said, think about this. What if I said, I'm going to give you $100 million? How would you feel? He said, I'd feel great. He said, but what if the next day I called you up and I said, you know, Bill, I can't give you $100 million. All I can do is to give you $99 million. How would you feel? He said, I'd still feel good. And the rabbi said, that's what God did for me. Anyway, thanks for hearing me talk.